The average Delta Force operator serves between 8 and 12 years inside the unit before cumulative physical damage, multiple traumatic brain injuries from thousands of breaching charges and flashbang exposures, and the biological reality of maintaining Tier 1 physical standards past the age of 40 force them out of the only identity they have known. Former Delta operator Dale Comstock described the transition as harder than anything in selection, stating that you go from being the most trusted person in the most classified rooms in the world to being nobody at a job interview. Every year, a small number of America's most lethal and psychologically screened warriors quietly leave Fort Bragg with broken bodies, classified service records they cannot discuss, and a set of skills that the civilian world has no framework to understand or employ. Inside Delta Force, the end comes with a hard line, one drawn not by policy, but by the limits of the human body. Operators rarely make it past their early 40s on the assault teams. Data obtained through FOIA requests shows the average age of forced separation is just under 40, 39.8 years. For most, the clock starts ticking the moment they finish selection, with the typical tenure in the unit lasting between 12 and 14 years. The reason isn't just age itself, but the accumulation of injuries that no amount of training or toughness can overcome. Every blast from a breaching charge, every concussion grenade, every hard landing adds up. Delta's own internal standards track blast exposure in psi milliseconds, a measurement of the shockwave force absorbed by the body. Once an operator crosses the threshold, often cited as 120 psi milliseconds of cumulative blast, they're flagged for medical review, and many are pulled from operational roles. This is not just a precaution. Repeated exposure at these levels is linked to long-term neurological damage, chronic pain, and cognitive decline. The 2023 Uniformed Services University study found that traumatic brain injury rates in special operations are 3 to 5 times higher than in conventional units. Chronic pain is nearly universal. Over 85% of SOF veterans report persistent pain by the time they leave, and disability ratings between 70 and 100% are common. The system doesn't wait for a voluntary exit. Operators are told, sometimes abruptly, that their bodies have reached the end of the line for direct action. Dale Comstock described the moment as being expelled by biology. Patrick McNamara puts it more bluntly. You don't get to choose when you're done. Your body tells you. The reality is that even the most resilient warriors face a cutoff that is both medical and mathematical. There is no gradual winding down, just a forced break from the only world where their skills, instincts, and scars make sense. For many, the loss is immediate and total, leaving them to navigate a civilian landscape with a body and mind shaped by years of relentless, classified violence. Most future Delta Force operators begin their military journey at a young age. Enlistment usually happens between 18 and 22, with the average new recruit joining the Army just shy of their 20th birthday. Before they ever set foot in Delta's selection course, these soldiers have already spent years building experience in demanding environments, often in the 75th Ranger Regiment or Special Forces. By the time they're eligible to apply for Delta selection, they're typically 24 to 27 years old. The process is deliberate and slow, designed to filter for maturity and resilience as much as for physical skill. Selection itself is a crucible. Candidates face a multi-week ordeal of land navigation, ruck marches, and psychological screening. Only a small fraction make it through to the next phase, the 6-month Operator Training Course, or OTC. OTC is where the transformation happens. Here, future operators learn the advanced skills that define Delta: close quarters battle, hostage rescue, breaching, and specialized driving. The pace is relentless, and the standards are unwavering. By the end, the graduates are among the most capable soldiers in the world, but they've also begun a journey that will ask more of their bodies and minds than any other path in the Army. The timeline is unforgiving. Most operators join Delta in their mid to late 20s, and the average tenure on an assault team is just over a decade. The same system that demands years of investment and training also guarantees a short operational lifespan. By their late 30s, many are already approaching the end of their time in direct action roles. Internal JSOC records and alumni surveys confirm the pattern. The window for peak performance is narrow, and there's little room for error or recovery. For these men, the clock starts ticking the day they pass OTC, and every year spent in the unit brings them closer to a forced exit, long before the 20-year mark that would guarantee a full military retirement. The early commitment required to reach Delta collides head-on with the early exit forced by accumulated damage, leaving operators with little time to prepare for what comes next. The damage begins with the first controlled explosion. Operators assigned to breaching roles absorb repeated shockwaves, each measured in CI milliseconds, a technical term for the force delivered by a blast over a fraction of a second. Over a Delta career, the cumulative exposure can reach levels that would sideline an NFL linebacker. The average door breach delivers about 42 psi-ms, a figure that is 1.3 times the energy of a standard NFL concussion. Unlike football, there is no off-season. Operators might hit this number dozens of times in a single week, and their blast meters, when used, often max out before the training day ends. Musculoskeletal injuries are nearly as predictable as sunrise. Department of Defense medical studies show that 56% of special operations soldiers report a new injury every year, most from overuse and load carriage. The job demands rucksacks weighing 70 pounds or more, worn for miles over broken ground, sometimes under fire. MRI scans from retired operators reveal that a third have lost significant disc height in their lumbar spine. Chronic pain is not just common, it is almost universal. By the time they leave, more than 85% of Delta veterans report pain that never really goes away, and the majority receive disability ratings between 70 and 100%. Hearing loss is another silent injury. Explosives, gunfire, and helicopter rotors create a soundscape that easily exceeds 170 decibels. Over years, this erodes the fine hairs in the inner ear, leaving operators with an average loss of 25 decibels in the high-frequency range. Yet, VA audiology rules often deny compensation unless the loss meets strict thresholds, leaving many with functional impairment but little official recognition. Traumatic brain injury forms the invisible core of the crisis. A 2023 study from Uniformed Services University found that TBI rates among Special Operations Forces are 3 to 5 times higher than in the rest of the military. The VA's own records show that even when a TBI is documented, disability ratings can swing wildly, from 10% to 40%, or sometimes nothing at all. Some operators describe a cap. Once you hit a certain number of blast exposures, the risk of permanent neurological decline becomes too great to ignore. At that point, the system steps in. Operators are pulled, sometimes abruptly, from the only job they have ever known, not because they want to leave, but because their bodies and brains can no longer absorb the punishment. The end is not a choice. It is a biological inevitability, written in scar tissue, MRI scans, and the silent gaps left by lost hearing. 30% of Delta Force veterans leave service with a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. The numbers alone are stark, but they only hint at the depth of the psychological fallout. The Department of Defense's own suicide prevention report puts the suicide rate for special operations veterans at 1.5 times that of the broader military. For Delta operators, the risk is even harder to measure, buried beneath layers of secrecy and silence. Between 2017 and 2023, at least 9 former members have died by suicide. Cases rarely make headlines, but ripple through the tight-knit JSOC community. Moral injury, a wound that cuts deeper than physical pain, affects nearly 1 in 4. These are not just statistics, they are the lived aftermath of actions that, while sanctioned, can haunt a person for decades. Operators are trained to compartmentalize, to do what's required and move forward. But when the missions end, the weight of those decisions can become unbearable. Dr. Charles Morgan, a psychiatrist who has studied elite units for decades, describes the transition as a kind of death. When you take away the mission, you take away the self. Dale Comstock puts it more bluntly. Getting out was harder than selection. You lose your tribe, your purpose, and the only world where you belong. For many, the abrupt break from Delta is not just a career change, but an existential rupture. The skills that once defined them, decisiveness under fire, the ability to operate in chaos, don't translate to a civilian world that has no frame of reference for what they've endured. The classified nature of their service means they can't even explain the source of their struggles to friends, family, or therapists. Patrick McNamara describes the isolation. You're not allowed to talk about what's really eating you. You're alone, even in a crowd. The loss of identity is compounded by the culture of silence. Operators sign lifelong non-disclosure agreements, cutting them off from the very stories that shaped them. The result is a dual exile, from the unit that once anchored their sense of self, and from a society that can't begin to understand what they've lost. The numbers: 30% PTSD, 22% moral injury, suicide rates far above the norm, are the visible edge of a crisis that remains largely unspoken. Each statistic is a story of a warrior forced to leave the battlefield, only to find the real fight begins after the uniform comes off. The first promises that greet a Delta operator leaving the unit are financial. Recruiters for private military contractors dangle day rates between $600 and $2,000, depending on the risk and location. For someone who spent years earning a fraction of that in uniform, the numbers are impossible to ignore. Companies like Triple Canopy, Academy, and Constellus actively seek out former Delta and DEVGRU operators, offering contracts that look on paper like a golden parachute. But the reality is more complicated. Most contracts are short-term, tied to specific deployments or training cycles, and benefits like health insurance often disappear the moment the contract ends. Lawsuits filed by former contractors reveal how fragile these arrangements can be. A spinal injury in Iraq or Afghanistan can leave a veteran fighting for promised disability coverage years after the fact. The intelligence community is another well-worn path. The CIAS Special Activities Center, particularly Ground Branch, recruits heavily from Delta's alumni. Salaries here can reach $150,000 per year, with the added draw of steady employment and access to the same world of clearances and classified missions. Operators who make this transition often find the work familiar, but the secrecy is just as suffocating. The non-disclosure agreements that bound them in Delta follow them into the CIA, reinforcing a culture of silence that can make even the most lucrative job feel isolating. Patrick McNamara, who moved into intelligence consulting after his time in the unit, describes it as the same game, different jersey. The skills translate, but the sense of belonging rarely does. The defense consulting and training roles offer another route. Major defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Booz Allen, employ former operators as subject matter experts, paying between $150,000 and $180,000 per year. These jobs often leverage the tactical knowledge and leadership experience honed in Delta, but the transition is rarely seamless. The work can be rewarding, but it is also bounded by the same NDAS that prevent operators from sharing the details that make their expertise unique. Consulting contracts are often project-based, with little job security and no guarantee of long-term benefits. For many, the move into consulting is less a new career than a stopgap, a way to keep food on the table while searching for something that feels like purpose. The most persistent barrier is the legacy of classified service, lifelong NDAS, and the need-to-know principle mean that operators cannot even list most of their achievements on a resume. Job interviews become exercises in omission. Even in the defense industry, where many hiring managers are former military, the inability to discuss specific missions or skills can be a deal breaker, McNamara recalls. You are forced to talk around the only things that made you valuable in the first place. The result is a paradox. The more elite the service, the harder it becomes to prove your worth outside the tribe. Every path holds the promise of stability, but each is bounded by invisible walls, legal, psychological, and cultural. The financial rewards are real but often fleeting, and the sense of exile rarely fades. For Delta operators, the end of the line is not just a medical event, but the start of a search for meaning in a world that does not know what questions to ask. For a Delta Force operator, the most jarring surprise often comes after the final mission, when the numbers no longer add up. The military's promise of a stable retirement is built around a 20-year career. but most Delta operators are forced out years before they hit that mark. The difference isn't just symbolic. A full pension for a senior enlisted soldier, around $4,000 a month, remains out of reach. Instead, the average Delta veteran receives a medical retirement of roughly $1,250 a month, a figure that barely covers rent in many American cities. Disability compensation from the VA can add about $2,400 a month for those with high ratings, but the process is unpredictable. Medical costs, especially for chronic pain and specialized care, often exceed $4,500 a year out of pocket. The result is a gap that leaves many former operators living month to month, despite years of elite service. Lisa Hart, a clinical social worker who has spent over a decade counseling special operations veterans, puts it simply, they gave everything, and now they are left to fight for scraps. The system wasn't built for people who break themselves in service before the finish line. Support networks step in where official programs fall short. The Special Operations Association of America reports that about 23% of medically separated Delta operators reach out for help within their first year out. Peer-led nonprofits like the Green Beret Foundation offer counseling, scholarships, and job workshops. But the demand is rising faster than resources can keep up. Internal data from JSOC shows that in 2023, a mentorship pilot program matched only a fraction of new retirees with seasoned mentors, leaving most to navigate the transition alone. Even with these safety nets, the attrition rate in Delta remains stubbornly high. 12% of operators are lost each year to injury or forced separation, a figure that outpaces most military units. Recruitment has struggled to keep pace, dropping by 15% over the last 5 years. The financial and emotional uncertainty is rippling back into the pipeline, making it harder to attract and retain the next generation of candidates. Behind the numbers is a simple truth. The cost of early exit isn't just measured in lost pay, but in lost readiness. When operators are forced out before they are ready, financially or psychologically, the entire system absorbs the shock. For Delta Force, a unit defined by its ability to adapt and endure, the growing gap between service and support threatens not only the lives of its veterans, but the future of the force itself. Today, hundreds of former Delta operators live with debilitating injuries, invisible scars, and an identity ripped away by biology, not by choice. VA data shows Special Operations Forces veterans face a 30% higher suicide risk, yet their classified service makes help harder to access. This is not just a personal crisis, it is a national one. America's most elite are left to navigate civilian life largely alone. Their sacrifice demands more than silence. Share your thoughts below.